Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 8 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds called The Elysian Kingdom. And in my opinion, this was the worst episode of the whole show so far, mostly because it was just too boring. And I don't mind episodes which are silly, which are humoristic, in which characters are put into some simulation by some alien entity, or holodeck episodes when they play dress up or stuff like that. I loved many such episodes in all the Star Trek shows. So it's not the reason I dislike this episode. That's actually the only redeeming part of the episode because there are some funny moments by some of the characters, some of the actors are good in this episode. So that's actually the only thing I like about this whole episode. What I don't like is the fact that it's just boring. The story is too weak to hold it, because even in those type of episodes, when it's a holodeck episode or they stuck in some fantasy land by some alien, there still needs to be some kind of story, and the story here is just too weak for a whole episode, so it just felt boring. And the comedy element wasn't strong enough to compensate, meaning there were some funny moments because the actors play some different type of character to their usual one, so there is some fun element, but it wasn't strong enough to hold the whole episode with such a weak story. And even the sets were kind of lazy because they just redecorated the normal ship sets as if it's some fantasy land, but it's still the same sets of the ship, so it felt like a bottle episode in which they all play dress up in the usual sets of the ship. So obviously they cannot do a holodeck episode because they're not supposed to have holodecks yet on the show, so I guess that was their version of dressing up all the characters and to play in this magical kingdom, but it's all in the sets of the ship with small adjustments. So it also felt lazy visually, and acting wise, as I said, I think many of the actors are actually great. Actually, I really liked a lot of them in this episode much more than I did in all the previous episodes, especially the actress who plays Uhura was really great as this evil queen and all of that. I think acting wise she was great, and also Pike was great playing that different kind of character who is kind of like the comic relief. He's kind of the cowardly, traitorous, spineless guy who runs away from danger, and there are scenes of him kneeling in front of Uhura, bowing the knee to her. It was funny when in some moments you can tell the actor is almost about to crack up himself and barely holds it in, and that somehow made it even funnier. And there was a scene with Spock, who is now a wizard. He says, "I like this new magic called science." And I think that was a deliberate reference to his famous line from Discovery when he said, "I like science," which kind of became a meme poking fun at Discovery. So at least the writers are self-aware of the previous silly stuff and they're making references to that. So there were some funny moments in this episode, but the episode overall still felt really boring and pointless and really about nothing except the crew playing these fantasy characters, and that's it. And early on they kind of implied it might all be hallucination by Mabenga because he inhaled some substance from his experiments. Early on he was doing some kind of lab work with old style lab equipment, which also annoyed me because in the futuristic setting of the show, why would he need to manually do that kind of work? Shouldn't he only work on a computer and then have droids do all the work in some sealed lab or something? So no, he just manually puts chemicals together and then he accidentally causes some reaction and inhales it, and that's when all the stuff starts. And so you keep thinking that it's all a hallucination, which also reduces the stakes, and then in the end it reveals it was just a red herring. It wasn't because of that, it was actually some entity out in the nebula which causes all of this. And all the characters are basically from the book he was reading to his daughter, and so he thinks it was taken from his brain. In the end it's revealed it's taken from the brain of the daughter. And it's also funny how he keeps recognizing all the characters and they show us the pages from the book and they look exactly like the actors portraying them in this episode. That's how they were drawn in the book. So what a coincidence that is. That also was kind of funny, yet how ridiculous it was. And about the entity outside, they specifically said that it's a Boltzmann brain, a brain which spontaneously came out of nothing and exist by itself out in the universe, which is a ridiculous idea. That is a real idea, but that was a thought experiment which was deliberately ridiculous. No one ever suggested that it actually exists, and so that was also very stupid because they could have said that the nebula has some intricate energy patterns inside it which are similar to the human brain, something like that. They could have explained it scientifically, but instead they just pulled the most ridiculous idea supposedly from theoretical physics, but that was an idea that was deliberately ridiculous. It's never supposed to be taken literally, and yet they do. I guess the entity was kind of similar to that entity in TOS, which was keeping Cochrane alive on some planet, and for some reason it was a female entity, and in this episode also the entity outside the ship is female for some reason, even though why would a disembodied brain have any gender at all? It doesn't really make any sense. And the very end of the episode was especially annoying to me, because they set up this whole story arc of Mabenga's daughter being terminally ill, and that's why he keeps her in the transporter buffer so that she doesn't age as quickly, to give him time to find a cure, and he's hoping that in one of their voyages across the galaxy maybe he will find a cure for her. That's why he took her on the ship with him. So I think the setup of the story had some potential, and yet they finished this story right away, just a few episodes later, after barely dealing with it for just a few episodes. And that's it, and they finish it so easily in such a lazy way. So basically the entity cures the daughter right away, and that's the end of that storyline. Really, I was really surprised by that. So basically they wrote this potentially long story arc and then just finished it right away. So what was even the point of that? So it all felt really lazy, with such a lazy way to end it. Just basically a magic entity happened to find her and cure her, and that's it. And also the entity takes her with her in the end. So that was also kind of ridiculous, how easily the father gave up his daughter to some unknown entity which he just encountered. He had a one sentence conversation with the entity and immediately agrees for the entity to take his daughter away to space forever, and he'll never see her again, and he just immediately agrees with that. So that was also really silly at how quickly they resolved it. And there were some similar ideas back in TNG, when some entity wanted to take care of that kid who was traumatized because he lost his real parents, and the entity wanted to take care of him and give him everything he needs. And Picard argued with the entity and said, how can you provide a life for the child? If he'll just stay and live with you in this imaginary simulation, he will never have a family, he will never have children, he will never have a real life. You're denying him all of that just to momentarily ease his pain and all of that. So Picard argued against those kinds of entities and convince them not to take their children away to space. And yet in this episode, this father gives up his daughter immediately after a few sentences with this unknown alien which he doesn't really know anything about, and he just agrees that it will take his daughter away forever. So that was also kind of ridiculous. And it's not as if she was about to die, like he had some time left. He still kept her in the transporter buffer. Presumably he can do it for a few more years. So why does he give up so quickly? And also technically she will be giving up her humanity. She will become an energy creature that will live forever with this other unknown entity, and he will never see her again, and he's fine with that. So that also kind of annoyed me. And it all felt like a very lazy way to finish up that storyline, making me wonder what was the point of it at all. Like, why even introduce this story of this daughter that he tries to cure if they're going to finish it just a few episodes later with such an easy, quick solution by some magical entity. And there were many other illogical things across this whole episode, like if the doctor knows that the crew are under the influence of something and behaving not as themselves, but shouldn't he still care about their well-being physically? And yet in some places we see crew members being injured, and yet he, even though he's a doctor of the ship, he never bothers to check up on them or give them any kind of medical treatment. Like we have a few red shirts who were shot by arrows by number one, and even though it shows as if they were hit in the shoulder, yet for some reason they lose consciousness as a result, which is strange if they're not killed by it. So why do they lose consciousness? I guess the magical entity did it as part of the simulation. And yet the doctor, Dr. Mabenga, who is the ship's doctor, never bothers to even check on them to make sure they're alive and maybe do some kind of basic medical first aid treatment of them. No, he doesn't seem to care. And even in the end of the episode, when everything comes back to normal and the whole crew doesn't seem to remember anything that happened, so whatever happened with those injured crew members who were left to lie and bleed in the corridors, no one noticed that. I guess the magical entity simply cured them magically and wiped out all the blood stains in the corridor and all of that, so no one ever knew they got injured in the shoulder, which somehow rendered them unconscious. So that kind of logic in this episode annoyed me. I would be fine with magical scenarios if they said that, if they said the entity can do anything, fine, but shouldn't the doctor still check on his injured crew members since he knows that's their real bodies? Even if their brains are taken over by something else, shouldn't he still care about the well-being of the bodies of the crew members who got injured? And yet he doesn't seem to care even, and so that really annoyed me. And also there's the continuity issue with TOS, because we have crew members beaming from place to place on the ship itself, inside the ship, and yet in TOS it was specifically stated that side-to-side transporting inside the ship is extremely dangerous. It was very rarely done because of the danger involved. And yet in this show they keep beaming people from place to place inside the ship itself, which was stated to be very dangerous and rarely done in TOS. And so that's something I guess they will keep doing in the show. And I will probably make a compilation of all the times they did that, and then I will show it with that clip from TOS when Spock said that intership beaming is extremely risky and that's why it was rarely done. And then I will show a compilation of all the times they did it in this show. So what's even the point of making it a prequel show if they're not even trying to adhere to the continuity? What's the point of making all of these the same characters? Why didn't they just make a new show set in the future? And that will explain why they have more futuristic technology than they did in TOS, and just have new characters and do whatever they want. What was the point of making it a prequel? It might be a disaster. So that's my opinion on this episode. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.